This is episode number 103 of the Guns Magazine podcast. Hi there, and welcome to the Guns Magazine podcast. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent Wheat. Thanks for joining us as we talk to the interesting folks who make up the world of shooting, hunting, and the firearms industry. But before we get started with this episode, let's take just a second to talk about our great sponsors. Hodgdon is the presenting sponsor of the Guns Magazine podcast. Available in granular powder and pellets, Hodgdon's family of 777 powders gives muzzleloading enthusiasts a quick cleaning, low odor black powder substitute for rifle and pistol applications. To learn more about 777, visit hodgdon.com. Our supporting sponsor is IMR Powder. IMR strives to bring new and legendary powders to reloaders in a never-ending process of innovation. Whether you're reloading your rifle, pistol, shotgun, or muzzleloader, IMR has a powder to fit your needs. Learn more about this great portfolio of powders at imrpowder.com. Today is an episode I personally wanted to record for a long time. Erick Gelhaus is an old friend, but more importantly, he's an expert in the use of red dot sights. In addition to serving as range master at Gunsight Academy in their red dot classes, he helped rewrite their student handbook to add red dots, and perhaps most importantly, he's been carrying a red dot optic on his law enforcement pistol on the streets in all kind of weather conditions and all kind of situations for longer than most of us even realized red dots were a thing. Now here's my interview with Erick Gelhaus. Well, good afternoon, Erick.
Good afternoon, Brett.
Well, we recently did a gun crank segment on our video channel, and we did one segment titled, I Can't Find My Red Dot. I almost called it, I've fallen and I can't find my red dot. But anyway, that's pretty much the case. I think I speak for lots of guys of my age and level of experience that we realize red dots are the thing now, and everybody's using them, and the manufacturers are coming out with them, and I still have trouble finding the damn red dot. And Erick, among other things, he's a retired police officer. He did some time over in the sandbox with the U.S. Army and a bunch of other stuff, but now he's retired and teaching most of the time. And he also helped update the Gunsight Academy student handbook of late and added some material on red dots. So I thought, who better to talk to about why I can't find my red dot?
So it goes back to the presentation, getting the pistol up into the eye line. And for years with iron sights, what we were looking at was drawing to the front of the pistol, drawing to the front sight, trying to shift our focus to it, and trying to go to a hard focus on the front sight. That was our fixation, because the eye can only focus on one thing at a time.
Right. So
we were focusing on the front sight, putting that in the center of the blur that was the target or the threat. That's not something that's natural for the human body. Mm-hmm. We've really only been doing it like about the 500 years since we started putting sights on guns. If you look at kind of everything else we did with projectile-based weapons before that, javelins, spears, arrows, we were looking at the threat and launching the projectile towards it, right? There's no sight on a baseball. There's no sight on a football, and yet we can, with a little bit of practice, most people can throw and get that thing where they want it to go. Some better than others.
Yeah.
Right? There's a reason I became a cop.
Yeah.
But now with the dot, what we're able to do is look at the target, look at the threat, present the pistol in such a way that that dot appears in the eye target line. And we want to do it sooner, but that's later on. We want to get it into that line to where we're looking at the threat and letting the dot appear. But that kind of changes the presentation. Because like I said, we've been drawn to the front of the gun and letting the front sight coming onto the target guide us, and then bringing the rear sight into alignment. Well, now we're kind of drawn to the back of the gun because we're trying to get that dot in the sight at the back of the slide into the eye target line sooner. Mm-hmm. So it kind of changes how we present it. I will see folks struggle with this in classes, and I went through it myself a lot, is presenting the pistol, and then you're fishing around trying to find the dot.
That's me.
Stop. Once you get the gun up, if the dot's not there, leave it where it's at. Move your head to find the dot. figure out where physically that space is. And if you have to work on adjusting your presentation, then adjust your presentation, but adjust it from the holster work natural point of aim like you would with a rifle, right? So rather than muscling the sights onto target, move your body to where the sights are there when you present it. And then look, now a whole lot of the time that dot's going to be high, especially if you're transitioning between frames with different grip angles.
Yeah.
Like I grew up in a 1911 world and then it became a Glock world. That tends to put the gun in a different orientation, or at least the sights in a different orientation. So more often than not, that dot's probably going to be high. The easiest way for me to do it is contract my pinkies and drop the dot down from up high. Now, if I'm screwing up my presentation and I'm pushing the pistol left or right, that's not going to do it. And that's where I have to figure out, okay, where's the dot? Adjust my head to it. Now fix it. But that's in the training process. That's in working the presentations dry and then live.
So I guess it sounds like my problems are the same problems everybody's having. And that kind of begs the question that this is one of those, you hear guys endlessly argue it. Is it really faster?
Yes, I believe it is. I know there are folks who are doing a better job running the numbers on that in terms of times. And I know there's some instructors out there that are getting some pretty impressive draw to first shot times out there with the dots. It is faster if you start to trust the dot and accept it.
That sounds rather zen.
It is. It's like everything else, or most everything else that's stolen. When I was first carrying a dot on duty, and I did all of 2012 with a red dot on my pistol at work, I had a chance to carry it in all weather conditions, see it in the day, see it at night, see it in the rain, in the heat, in the fog, pretty much everything but snow, because we just don't have it where I'm at out here, and see how it worked. But the folks that were really able to take the practical application of this to where we're at now hadn't come along yet. So it was a lot of trial and error, emailing a buddy, texting a buddy, hey, what are you doing with this? How's this working? When I walked away from the dots because I had a reliability issue with them, I'd broken a number of the earlier red dots from one manufacturer over the course of several months, and I walked away from it. I just didn't trust them. That manufacturer has since done a radical improvement on the product, and the reliability is there amazingly well. Those first dots weren't designed to be on pistol slides getting slammed back and forth. They were designed to sit on top of rifles where the recoil took place inside.
Right.
So that's why we were breaking them. When I came back to them, first thing I did when I made the decision to go back to them was I went and took a class from Scott Jedlinski, took Scott class. And that's where we started talking about looking at the target or the threat a lot more, keeping your focus there and bringing the optic into the eye target line, and trying to do it sooner, not faster, but sooner. So on a presentation, once my hands meet up, the pistol's coming up more towards my face and then extending out. For me, that's the easiest way to do it. There's a couple other different ways to do it, rather than throwing the pistol out to almost full extension and then trying to find the dot. So I'm bringing the gun up. If you think so I shoot M&Ps. Big slide plate cover to my mustache. Now I can pick up the dot and extend it onto target. And I'm already seeing the dot in my peripheral vision much earlier. So I'm making the corrections, if I have to my presentation, that my eyes used to make when they would see the front sight before, slightly elevated. If it was off to one side or another, I would start to correct that automatically. By seeing the dot sooner, I'm able to start making the similar corrections if there's a problem.
Yeah.
One of the things is the way we're teaching it has changed. And I do this in classes with my business. We do this in the classes, the red dot classes down at Gunsight, is we end up teaching the presentation in reverse. Once we kind of get folks to where they have a baseline grip that they can work with, then instead of going from the holster, working through the whole process up on the target, we start out with the dot on target and just bring the arms back to where that slide plate cover or hammer or whatever reference you need is at the upper lip of the mustache, and then present the pistol, pick up the dot. And once there's some comfort with that, then we bring it back down to where the hands meet up. and then we go back to the holster. So we teach the presentation in reverse is one of the first things to work on that. Then I will give folks permission to not have a perfect sight picture. And I use the word permission very specifically because especially for those of us that came up shooting with a hard front sight focus on irons, that front sight had to have an equal amount of light on either side and the rear sight. And you have to have the top of the front sight even with the top of the rear sight. So we had to have that perfect sight picture. So I run a drill that I took from the parallax, showing parallax with rifle mounted optics to the pistol world. And we have folks drive the dot into the corners of the optic. If it's a square or rectangular shaped lens, we'll drive it to all four corners and shoot on the same point of aim. If you're shooting a round optic, I'll have you take it to 3, 6, 9, and 12 with the same point of aim. So once you see that, if I have that dot all the way against the right-hand side, but it's sitting on the aiming point and I'm shooting a group that when I'm all done, I can cover with the palm of my hand. Hopefully the brain's starting to pick up on that. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be there.
Just has to be there. Yeah.
And once you can accept what I found talking to students and myself, once I could accept, and the students have confirmed this, that dot didn't have to be micrometered into the dead center of the glass, then I stopped trying to make the dot more perfect than I ever made my iron sights.
That's an interesting concept because I think of rifle shooting. We call it, chasing the reticle. Is I got to work a little harder and get that reticle right in there. And in the meantime, you're totally falling apart because you're so focused on getting that reticle just at the right spot and getting your trigger pull at the right second when that reticle is precisely placed. And what you're saying is just get it out there, make the shot.
Yeah. And if I'm going for, okay, the dot's roughly where I need it to be, I can press the trigger down, then I can focus on trigger control while the dot's in the general area versus, oh, it's absolutely perfect left to right, top to bottom. I must make the gun go bang now.
Yeah.
And I get the full body convulsion that sends the thing down to the bottom of the paper.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what we're trying to get away from. And that's where you'll hear people say, well, it's not fast enough. It's too slow. And I can't remember who said it, but perfection is the enemy of good.
Right.
And that's one of the problems is I believe, I think, based on my own experience and watching plenty of other folks with this now, is if you're trying to be perfect, the good's really hard to achieve.
Yeah.
Get to good and then work on increasing it in increments, but don't try to be perfect from the get-go.
Well, sitting here thinking about it, maybe we've done a bit of disservice. We're getting these tiny little dots, and maybe we should be having a bigger pumpkin setting there so that folks aren't so worried about getting that little bitty red dot right in the dead center of the bullseye and then pressing the trigger. Because that's unconsciously what I find myself doing. It's like a precision rifle scope. I got to find the dot, and then I got to get it right there, and that's why it's much slower for me.
The good news is we've got a wide variety of dot sizes to choose from. So if you want to shoot a 1 MOA dot, 1 inch at 100 yards, you can. There's 1 MOA dots you can buy.
Right.
On red dots, I kind of came up under the 4 MOA dot on the aim points. Now, caveat, I worked for aim point for a few years, but I came up under the 4 MOA dot on the comp M's and the T1 optics. And I never really liked the switch to the 2 MOA dot on the T2s. Mm-hmm. To me, it just seemed too small. With the red dot pistols, I've lucked out, and pretty much everything I've gotten has been a 3 to a 3.5 MOA dot. Yeah. So just a hair smaller than what I'm used to off of an aim point T1. And for me, that's a sweet spot. I was having a discussion with someone on the internet the other day who was kind of demanding aim point when their new optic finally ships is that it be a 2 MOA dot. Okay, I don't see the need, but if that's what you want, go for it.
Sure.
I know Trijicon has a triangle reticle that's in the 7 MOA range. Well, that's about the width. It's close to the A zone, maybe say bigger than the A zone. It's not quite the same width of the scoring area on the gun sight option targets. But if you can shoot that, then you're still going to get really good hits on a human torso at that distance, right? Provided you can put the dot where you need it to be and your trigger manipulation is such that you're not disturbing it. Yeah, go for it. And mathematician-wise, I can't tell you the numbers, but I know talking to the guys who can do the math, a fixed front sight is several MOA larger than any of the dots. It's like at least 12 MOA, and I've heard guys talk about fixed front sights being up to the 18 MOA range.
Good point.
So, and one of the other things that goes with that is if you're starting to fixate on the dot, then that dot's going to move more, and then it's not perfect. So now you're fixating on the dot that's moving, and it just gets to be a whole circle.
Yeah. See, that's why I called you. I'm taking notes as fast as my little paws will go. And I'm going to be in Gunsight, I think, in about another month, and I'll probably get to do some of this stuff. But one thing that I found pretty fascinating, and I'd like to get your thoughts on it, is a couple of people pointed out, Roy Huntington, our former boss, said, up close and personal, you can kind of look at it as almost a large aperture reticle,
Yes.
Just put the circle or the TV on the problem and go to work if it's that close up and dirty, because, you need to get it done.
Yes. We have hammered on sighted fire, and I'm saying we collectively, the community, not just any one trainer or any one school, have hammered on sighted fire to the point that I think if you haven't looked at some of the history, we may not realize how sighted fire was done. Jim Cirillo did really, really good work with the stakeout unit with the shape of the gun.
Mm-hmm.
So my understanding of it, and I never had a chance to meet the man, and I may be misremembering the books, was basically his presentation was gun came up. As long as he didn't see too much of the cylinder on either side or too much of the barrel, that lug on top of the barrel on either side, right? He knew he was on and could go to work. That's sighted fire. Mm-hmm. Where that plays over to the dots is how we're teaching dealing with either the dot not being there for whatever reason, or there being some sort of malfunction with the dot. And so we have put in a few different ways to do this, one of which is if the optic's not blocked itself, like it didn't take some sort of impact to the front of the glass that shattered the glass to where you can't see through, or it's not clogged with mud from either side, use the window as a ghost ring. Mm-hmm. Now you have to practice this so you know where you're shooting, but there's a couple hacks to help with that, to help let you use that as your aiming reference. I tend to use the rear slide plate cover, and it's a place that's comfortable for me. Or if I'm shooting in the 1911, I'll use the hammer as my reference point, right? When I can see that, when that comes into my eye line over the target, I'll go to work.
Yeah.
I might be a little high, I might be a little low, but I'm going to be able to do work to the upper chest or the center of whatever I'm given with that. The Trijicon RMR and some of the other designs out there, the RMR does it the best. It's got kind of those owl-shaped ears on top of the housing. Put those on the collarbone and go to work. And then Bushnell and Crimson Trace, and I've done media events for both of those companies down at Gunsight in the last year with their new pistol-mounted optics. They have a straight line across the top, and I can take that straight line and put that on the shoulders of the target and go to work, because there's the offset. There's the offset between that and the center of the barrel, and putting that on the shoulders lets me put the shots into the upper chest on the target. My preferred optic happens to be the Aimpoint Acro. That's just preference for me. That the top of that one's a little rounded, a little weird, so it's hard to use that for, and that's why I default to the slide plate cover or the hammer as being my aiming point. When I see that on where I want the rounds to go is when I go to work.
Yeah. One thing that I think folks pretty much agree on is at a distance, red dots are worlds better than iron sights in most cases. Is there a distance where, that becomes really readily apparent?
It's probably going to be shooter based on what they could not do. I was not a good distance shot with a pistol, and by that I'm talking 25 and beyond.
Same for me.
When I was shooting irons. Now that I've gone to dots, I won't say 25 is easy because I still have to do my part of the work.
Sure.
But 50, 75, we had on the outdoor range my old organization used, we had a steel target out at about 75 to 80. And when we would be doing instructor stuff, it would just be one of those line up and take shots, just it kind of in rotation. And once I switched to a dot, as long as I ran the trigger correctly, I did not have a problem hitting that thing consistently.
Wow.
So, and I mean, it was a pepper popper sized target that would just happen to be upright. We only got pistols at it.
Yeah. You know, and you were talking at one point about, finding the dot and all that. Part of my problem is that I'm so not used to these things. I've got a gun sitting here that I can't say what it is. It's a new one coming out, and it comes with a red dot. And I keep putting it up there, trying to, work on this idea, doing some dry practice. And the first thing that goes through my head every time is, well, the dot didn't turn on. And so far, that's not been the case at all. It's been, I can't find the dot, and I end up getting wrapped around the axle on that. So I'm thinking my equipment's failed when it's the loose nut behind the gun that's failed.
So two suggestions: work your presentation backwards. Put like a 3x5 card up on the wall. Mm-hmm. That's safe on the backside of it. So if you screw up the dry practice process, right, whatever's on the backside of that 3x5 card will prevent more drama than the loud noise.
Yeah.
And work the presentation in reverse. The other thing is, we do this in the classes, and with student feedback, we do this at least a couple times every day in the class, is take blue painter's tape, put it over the downrange lens. What that does is it lets the strong eye see the dot in the window. The painter's tape doesn't mar the glass, doesn't leave any residue or any garbage. And the weak eye, the non-dominant eye, whatever we're calling it this week, sees the target as you present the pistol.
Oh, wow.
Strong eye sees the dot, weak eye sees the target. So now you're starting to work binocular vision, and you're starting to pick it up. You can work on picking it up sooner. And then once you figure out okay, I'm not seeing the dot, leave the gun where it is, move your head to it, then work that high chest to that spot presentation more dry. To start wiring it in, and then work more of the presentation until eventually you're coming from the holster up to that spot.
Yeah. Never thought of that. That makes a lot of sense. And with the added benefit, I'm a one-eyed shooter. I always have been. And when we were brought up, you had to close the off eye. And I cannot break that habit. And I should. I mean, in a fight especially, you need all the vision you can get. But years and years and years and years and years of shooting, it's so hard for me. That would be a great drill to make that happen.
So I originally threw it into the curriculum to help students with breaking the fixation on the dot, trying to focus on the dot. And I had feedback from another gun sight instructor who I've known. Paul and I were in the same Army unit in the late 80s. So I've known him that long. I mean, he ran a firearms program at a pretty good sized Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area law enforcement agency. And then Paul came onto staff with us down there. And Paul is a student in one of the early Red Dot classes. And Paul asked several times during the class, hey, can we go back to putting the tape on? Can we go back to putting the tape on? And what it was doing was helping him force both eyes open.
Yeah.
And helping him not to fixate on the dot, but letting the dot appear. And that's why I started throwing that in any of my curriculum where you're going to do that, like especially during the gun sight classes or 5 days, you're going to do that at least twice a day. You'll do that when we run school drills in the morning and school drills in the afternoon to help reinforce that.
Interesting thought. So when we're talking about this transition training, and obviously it depends on the shooter, the skill level, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But realistically, what kind of time are we looking on a transition for an average shooter that, is as competent as they feel they need to be, and they've been shooting iron sights all these years, a guy like me? And do I need to take, an entire week, 2,000 repetitions, or is it just till it happens?
An 8 to 16 hour, 1 to 2 day class is going to get you the repetitions, or at least it will get you started on that road. It's like anything else, right? It wasn't, when we were playing ball in school, whatever the sport was, we didn't just go to practice after school and let that 2 hours 4 times a week be the only time we did it.
Yeah.
Right. Now, there were the really gifted kids who can take that a little bit more, but a lot of us that were just kind of journeymen and playing sports to play sports, right? We not only would do the practice sessions, we were still doing stuff on our own, trying to just get to a baseline level of competency. So a 1 to 2 day class, depending on the reps, coupled with your own practice afterwards, just like you have to drive practice now, you got to dry practice with the dot.
Yeah.
Is going to get you there. Because there's some things that go with that. And it's not just bringing the pistol up and picking up the dot. It's transitioning from one target to another, because we're not fixating on the front sight. We're looking at the target or the threat. It's maintenance issues, right? What are the things I need to do to keep the dot on the gun?
Yeah.
What do I need to, what are the battery issues, right? I love my aim-point acro, but I also have a note set in the calendar on my phone, 9 a.m. the first of every month, change the battery. Because until the P2s come out, the new ones come out, the original ones had a very short battery life. But if I use a Turgicon RMR, I don't have to change the battery anywhere near as often. But when I change the battery, I have to re-zero the pistol.
Right.
So then I have to work through the whole remounting process of that. So there's no free lunch, but it's having an instructor who can work through you with those issues and talk to you about pros and cons, what's good about this optic versus, what counts against that, and be able to put those out there.
Yeah.
One discussion I recently had with somebody by email, and it was a longtime gun sight student, because they mentioned they had taken a 5.99 from Colonel Cooper.
Oh my. And
I can't remember. I started out as a student down there in 94, and I can't remember a 5.99 having been offered since I started going there. But he was still going down the road of putting the dot on the pistol, adjusting the dot to the iron sights, so that when he drew it, the dot was sitting on top of the front sight, and he knew the gun was already going to be pointing high because of that.
Yeah. So
he would just hold low.
Oh no!
Those are two separate sighting systems.
Yeah. Wow.
Right. The dot exists in a separate plane from the irons, and I understand what he's trying to do, and I kind of tried to explain to him, consider this, consider that, but ultimately that's his call.
Yeah.
I just think that's not the better way to do it.
Well, moving into the next part of this then is concealed carry. And I've never carried an optic concealed. It seems like it would be a little more ungainly and uncomfortable, but is that something I don't need to be worrying about?
I wouldn't worry about it. I'm kind of a large mammal. I generally carry an appendix. When I carry appendix with a dot, be it an acro, an RMR, or a hollow sun, I just have to make sure that my clothing's not skin tight, and you would not want to see me in clothing that was. So I make sure that my upper layers are loose.
Yeah.
The acro's a little bit, it's got a little bit more mass going front to back. So it has to be a concern. The hollow suns and the RMRs are cut with more of a curve coming from back to front.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not as many obvious sharp edges on it, but I haven't found that it digs in or makes life any more painful. Some grip textures that I have are more uncomfortable than the optic.
Well, I can't wait to try it myself, but I'm not going to do that until I'm relatively comfortable that I'm going to do my job if I ever have to pull my gun and go to work. But I'll have you put on your little Mr. Wizard cap. And so what do you think the future holds? Obviously, red dots are going to become more and more of a thing in the defensive pistol industry. But where do you think the future is, both short-term and long-term? And then maybe talk a little bit about the technology, where you think it's going to go, or maybe it's matured by now.
Initially, what I would hope for is that we get the mounting solutions down. I'm not seeing optics fail like they were a few years ago, in terms of the optic itself failing mechanically or electronically. But I am seeing, and this is a constant theme in the classes, is the mounting system failing. With one exception, and it's the aim point. The aim point mounting system is not failing to the regularity that we're seeing the others do. And part of that is because the aim point essentially clamps left to right on what looks like a section of Weaver or Picatinny rail. Mm-hmm. It's not the exact dimensions, but if you haven't seen it, that's kind of what it looks like it clamps to.
Yeah.
It has a good, fairly thick bolt running left to right, or right to left through the optic. Everything else has smaller screws that drill down into the slide.
Yeah.
And those are smaller screws in terms of diameter, and they're shorter screws in terms of depth, because you have the firing pin channel you have extractors, you have firing pin safeties that are in that area, so they can't necessarily take up as much space.
Well, I have to laugh and stop you there because I have a gun, a popular gun from maybe Germany, and I mounted a very popular red dot on it, and things stopped working. And I used all the factory mounting screws and all that, and come to find out, the mounting screws where they'd been drilled and tapped, they were too long, and they were going down into the guts of the slide and creating this just enough. You wouldn't even really know it, but when I sent it to the gunsmith, they said, you got yourself a problem here because you got a screw going down into all that working stuff. So I was amazed that it was a gunsmith applied mounting position for this particular optic, and I used the factory mounting stuff, and of course I blew Loctited it and all that, and just couldn't figure it out because it was kind of an intermittent thing. I was really shocked because all the stuff was first quality, top of the line stuff.
It happens. I watched it last summer. Happened to a very good friend of mine. He lost a screw off of his optic, and he went and grabbed another screw that was holding the same make and model optic onto a rifle and screwed it down into the optic, into the slide, and it bound the entire gun up.
Wow.
So going back to the question, fixing the mounting solutions is going to be the first thing that needs to happen, and I hope it happens. I was really looking forward to things like Unity Tactical's Add Mount 2.0 coming out, or some of the other similar one cut to the slide different mounting plate systems from some other aftermarket companies, because we've seen some issues with the factory mounting systems and plates. Alas, some of those haven't come to fruition. So I'm drifting back to direct mounting in favor of direct mounting the optics onto the slide. So having a slide cut for that optic.
Yeah.
Drawback is once you cut that slide for that optic, you're stuck with that footprint.
Exactly.
And the industry hasn't necessarily yet agreed upon what the standard footprint is. I know there's at least three. Now there's four out there. There's the RMR, there's the Leupold Delta Point Pro, there's the old Doctor footprint, and then there's a smaller footprint for like the single stack 9 concealed carry guns that the really miniature optics can go on. And Aimpoint had their acro cut, and when Holosun released their enclosed emitter bolt right to left optic, it comes with a different footprint. So now we're looking at 6 different footprints out there. You just kind of have to decide what you're going to go with and hope that footprint stays in existence for some time. We've gotten battery life. Now, once the Aimpoint Acro P2 hits, we'll have battery life out to levels that everybody's used to across the board. There'll be multi-year battery life. So that's solid. The early electronic and mechanical adjustment failures, because I never broke an optic electronically, I always broke them mechanically. The windage adjustments would fail on them. And I don't know why the optics mounted on Glocks were failing electronically and optics mounted on MMPs were failing mechanically. There's something different in the recoil, and that's well beyond my pay grade.
Yeah.
But we're not seeing those failures anymore. So it's battery life. We got the battery life fixed. It's just going to be the mounting thing. I think the next probably evolution after the mounting is going to be optics sitting lower and lower so that you can use closer to traditional height iron sights, and that the dot's easier to pick up on presentation because you're bringing the gun to the spot that you were already used to bringing to find the irons.
Yeah.
I've got a little MMP shield with a dot on it that sits very low in it, and it's nice because I can use the stock iron sights. In fact, they build it that way. You can still use the stock iron sights. That when I present, I see the irons and the dot perfectly without having to make any adjustments for it.
Wow.
I hope that's where the industry's going.
Yeah. What do you think in terms of students? I mean, are iron sights dead in 15, 20 years?
Iron sights dead on rifles now, 20 plus years into the Aimpoint EOTech world.
Yeah.
I don't think they're dead. They will be just like on rifles. We're seeing a lot more optics, be it low power variables or some sort of single dot or projected holographic image. And that's the norm, even on very inexpensive rifles with very inexpensive optics. It's still pretty much the norm. I think that's where we'll be in the pistol world.
Yeah.
I'm looking at guys mounting optics onto revolvers, very large frame, large caliber revolvers. I'm seeing them on concealed carry revolvers. We're seeing the dots on CCW guns, CCW semi-auto pistols. Conservatively, say 2/3 of them will be red dot in 15 to 20 years, and that's probably a low ball.
Yeah. Well, you make a good point that, you know, everybody's putting an optic on their rifle, and then what's the second thing they buy? Backup irons.
Yep.
Eric, that's great information. Like I said, I've just got all kinds of notes I've taken, and now I've got even more questions, and we're going to have to do a couple of follow-ups just on the mounting options alone, because that seems to be a big bugaboo. But unfortunately, we are limited in time. So before we go, though, I know you do some training on your own, and of course you work at gun sites. So how can folks find out where you're teaching and learn more? So
my private company is Cougar Mountain Solutions. On the internet, you can find me cougarmountainsolutions.com/blog. The website's very much a work in production, but that will at least get you to the front end. The company's on Facebook, Cougar Mountain Solutions, and then on Instagram, it's Cougar_Mountain_Solutions. All of my classes are posted in those places. I've got some upcoming stuff on the East Coast that's both open enrollment for decent, normal human beings, good Americans, as well as law enforcement. And then I'm the lead instructor or range master for the Red Dot classes down at Gun Sight, and they can always be found down there as well.
Excellent. Well, Eric, I consider you very much an expert. I didn't realize you've been using these things that long. So you've got a lot of practical experience, and it's been interesting. And this is going to be a topic that is an even far bigger part of the industry than what it is now. So we will keep in touch and talk more about it.
Yes, we will. And Brett, thank you for your time. I appreciate you having me on.
Sure thing. I'm doing my best to get up to speed with red dot optics, and I learned a lot from my chat with Erick Gelhaus. Hopefully, I can finally start down the path of using and carrying this new technology on my EDC pistol. And with that, I also sincerely hope you're enjoying the Guns Magazine podcast. Guns Magazine was first on the newsstand, and today we're bringing you the most interesting chats in the gun world. If you've got questions or comments about the show, please email me. That's editor@gunsmagazine.com. Make sure you subscribe to us on your favorite podcast directory, YouTube, and of course at gunsmagazine.com. And while you're online, don't forget to check out our great sister publications, American Handgunner Magazine at AmericanHandgunner.com, AmericanCop.com, and our numerous special editions available on our websites. I'd also appreciate it if you'd share a favorite episode or some kind words on your own social media. And don't forget to check out the presenting sponsor of the Guns Magazine podcast, Hodgdon Powder, and the supporting sponsor, IMR Powder. See their complete lineup of great black and smokeless powders at Hodgdon.com or IMRpowder.com. Well, that's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. For the entire staff at FMG Publications, I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat. Now get out there and get shooting.